Recently, I've been scrolling through YouTube and looking at these game dev tutorials. There are lots of videos explaining how to use the engine and the tools, how to make the mechanics, but rarely someone is talking about how to test them. Look, there is a difference between game design and game development. I know game design is part of game development, but for the duration of this video, I will be dividing the meanings for easier explanation. Game development talks about the technical aspects, such as how to use an engine, how to write the code, how to texture your models in Substance, whereas game design is something that happens before game development. Tasks like designing the gameplay loop, understanding the game's philosophy, deciding the game feel would come under game design. You need to understand the importance of design before the development, or else all of your work will end up feeling like garbage. The simplest way to explain this is game design is like coming up with a melody and composition of a song, and development is like recording and mixing it in the studio. Now that we have laid the basic understanding we are going to need for this video, let's start with the main topic. Importance of testing levels in games. Not importance of testing the levels in games, but importance of testing levels in games. I call them gymkhana levels. Gymkhana means a meet of sports, a place where people meet to discuss and play sports, somewhat like a sports club. These levels are made up of primitive shapes and grid textures. The primitive shapes help you to quickly lay out a level in a prototype fashion, and the grid textures are supposed to help you with calculating the distance. If you are using Unreal Engine, I recommend this asset pack to use in all of your game's testing levels. If you have seen any behind the scenes development footage of any AAA game, you will also notice that they have such dedicated levels to testing all of their mechanics. Now let's talk about the actual implementation and what quote-unquote rules you need to follow while making these levels. First step is to note down what type of game you are making. Is it a fighting game, stealth game, open world game? Then you need to write down the mechanics you need to test. And most importantly, what is your final vision for your game's actual levels? We'll cover these topics one by one. Your game's genre or playstyle will actually give you the head start of designing these levels. I'll give you a few examples. If you're making a fighting game like Mortal Kombat or For Honor, this is the average size you might need. The red one is the average size and the blue one is for the games where you have huge animations and moves that take up space, just like in Jump Force. You can also test combat of games like Sifu in such levels. If you are making a stealth game, you will need a bigger and tighter map. You will need lots of hiding objects your player can use to hide behind. There are two types of maps for a stealth game. One is, if your game is like Splinter Cell, you will need a map with narrow play area for each encounter, but a long stretch for walkthrough. It's just like a thin rope. But if your game is like Last of Us, you need to have wider areas. Such maps are actually trickier to make as you don't have a given path that your players need to follow. So you need to mark each hiding place as hiding location. Let's call it H location. For each H location, you need to have minimum 3 entry-exit points. The reason you need to have 3 points is because one point can be blocked by the enemy or something else. So you need to have another one as a backup. But having only 2 feels like your game is confined, and it feels artificial. It makes the player feel like you are asking them to choose between one. Having 3 entry-exit points will make it look more natural and gives the player more freedom to move around. Now you might say, hey, I have an open world game. How do I make these test levels? Well, then you have to focus on the mechanics one by one, but also in combination. This is the important part, in combination. The one by one part is fairly simple. You make multiple rooms, one for combat, one for looting and puzzle, one for testing your traversal mechanics. These are good to test if your game's code is working or not, to find out the bugs. But what you need to test is the open world. This is the reason why open worlds in Ubisoft games feel more alive. They usually have different systems which interact with each other, and levels designed in a way where it is number of mini sandboxes all over the map. Here I suggest you to make something I call a testing town. As the name suggests, it is a town where you test things. Start by focusing on the main feature of your game. Is it stealth like older Assassin's Creed? Is it like Spider-Man where you can have long swings? Is it like Ghost of Tsushima, a bit grounded and like an open free world? After that, note down all the mechanics you have. Now the base of your level, design the layout according to the main feature of your game. Then alter it by adding or removing things which will encourage your players to use the additional features you have, like zip lines, hiding bushes, ammo collection places. To take this even a step further, make 3 of such towns. 2 small towns and 1 medium-sized town, which is 1.5 size bigger than the small town. That is 1.5 times bigger than the smaller town. Place them in a triangle and add small mini levels in between these towns, like a village made out of 2 or 3 houses or maybe 5 or 6. This way you will have a mini open world to test with. Here you can test the combat, the traversal and even the exploration bits. The best part about this is, if you are an indie game studio or making a game solo, you can add mini missions in this level and export a build out of it, and then give it out to your players to test. This way it already gives a sense of how your final game will be. Last but not the least, we need to talk about the procedural levels. If you want to know more about the procedural levels, you can watch a video I made about the same topic. Now you might be thinking we need to run a code and generate the procedural level and test. Well, no. You need to do exact opposite. You need to test and collect the data to feed in your procedural generation code. For example, I'm making a game about fast-paced movement shooter. So I have made a room which is the average size of my procedural levels. Now I add in the ramps and cubes to represent the buildings and the terrain. Now I test every aspect of it. How far or close I need this building so my player can jump from one building to the other. How much space does my combat take? Which gives me the info about the negative spaces I need between the buildings or under it. How many big buildings and how many small buildings I need. It also tells me that for each big building I generate, I need to generate 2 small buildings around it. After altering the levels multiple times, I end up with lots of rules for automatic level generation. Now is the time when I generate the levels and test them and see if the generation is abiding by the rules of the code. Once you are satisfied with your mechanics, you can now start to transition to a game like testing levels, which means you need to take your test level and add some assets that you are going to use in the final game. The reason to do this is till now you were testing with grid textures, which do give you references for distance and look clean, but that's not how your final game will be. You need to test if the colors of your game aren't distracting, like if the grass is almost the same color as your enemies. It will be too difficult to spot the enemies. Do the complex collisions of the final assets interfere and ruin the fun of your parkour? Another reason is that the test level is mostly a flat ground, which won't be the case for most of the games. If you have radical changes in the elevation of your levels, your mechanics can bug out. Maybe your AI won't be able to travel around just because of the elevations. So while transitioning from Gymkhana levels to a final testing level, you need to smoothly transition by changing one part at a time and test it. No need to hurry. Test your assets, test your color palettes, test your terrain. And then you will have a mechanic that is well tested and ready to be in the final game. I hope this video helps you. I try to cover such niche topics which aren't covered by many people. This is it for this video. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, keep playing.